The 18 Strong Podcast, episode number 361 with Mike Carroll of Fit for Golf. What's up, guys? Welcome back to the 18 Strong Podcast, where we're here to help you build a stronger game because we believe every golfer deserves to play better longer. In this episode, I'm super excited to finally have Mike Carroll on the show from Fit for Golf. Mike has one of the most popular social media accounts and golf fitness apps out there and is really doing some great things for not just the high-level golfers, but really the golf population in general. And so in today's episode, we get to really kind of talk about the in and outs of strength training, building speed in your golf game, and really how keeping things simple is really the best way for you to make significant gains without overdoing it. But also, if you're just starting out, that you're going to be able to make much more significant gains than you think you are. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the do's and don'ts of strength training and speed training. And so we're going to really help you figure out what you need to do to make your game better and make yourself stronger right after this. Our partners over at Linksole have been providing us with the best apparel for both on the course and off the course, from polos to t-shirts like the one I have on right now. Everything that they have is meant to be worn from the golf course to wherever you're going next, whether that be casual, whether that be to the beach. There's all different options over there. So go to 18strong.com/Linksole. You'll get 20% off of anything in your cart over on Linksole's website. So again, 18strong.com/Linksole for our favorite brand of apparel for anything on the golf course and off. Now let's get to this week's interview. Mike Carroll, welcome to the 18 Strong Podcast.
Thanks very much for having me, Jeff. I'm looking forward to chatting.
Yeah, honestly, I can't believe that it's taken me this long to bring you on the show. It feels like we should have had this conversation years ago. But I just love everything that you're doing. I think when people think fitness and golf, you are definitely one of the people that come to mind, especially in the social media world and the fitness world. So congrats, first of all, on all your success and everything you're doing.
Thank you very much. I think the fact you haven't gotten me on is probably a sign that you've got far more interesting guests to talk to, which is probably a good thing.
So where are you now? Obviously, people can tell from your accent that you're not from the States, but you're in the States now, right?
Yeah, I've been in Southern California for 7 years, around like Huntington Beach, Newport Beach, Irvine area. I'm from Ireland. I was born there. All my family's there. I was there until I finished college. And then a couple of years afterwards, I moved out here to work for a guy called Mike Hansen in a gym called Hansen Fitness for Golf. Mike's been kind of specializing in training golfers for probably maybe 20 years now, definitely over 15. And there was a job opportunity in his gym that I saw online and applied, came over. So I came over in 2016 and started working for him. At the same time, I started up the Fit for Golf. And about 3 years ago, I stopped working for Mike and went full time with Fit for Golf, which is 95% the app. And then I traveled to work with a couple of professional players a little bit, but only a few times a year. So kind of been interesting in the last few years. I've basically stopped being an in-person trainer, which I had been for the 10 years previous. And now I'm much more so like running an online business, and I guess consulting with some high-level players, trying to help them with their physical preparation.
So you said you've traveled to a couple tournaments. Are there any pros in your area that you see on a relatively normal basis, or is it all just consultation stuff?
So there's not a single PGA Tour player lives in California, to the best of my knowledge.
Really?
Because the state taxes are so high.
Yeah.
I think Phil was the last one. And then when his daughter finished high school, I think even he left. Obviously, he's one of the guys who's made enough money where he wouldn't think like it would matter. But I honestly don't think there's any of them based here. So I currently work with 3 PGA Tour players but none of them live here. So I tend to see them at tournaments. And what's nice about that is I go to a tournament and I get to see 2 or 3 of them in the same week. So it's a nice way to catch up. And I do that a few times a year. And then most of it is just talking to them regularly by phone and text and checking up on things that way.
Gotcha. So yeah, a lot of online stuff. When you first meet with them, do you do an in-person assessment? Like, do you travel to go see them even before a tournament or anything like that? Or is it strictly pretty much at the golf tournaments?
No, we usually get started after a phone call, to be honest. Like, I'm not huge on like regimented screenings or assessments, to be honest. And because I think we can usually kind of start training and making progress without doing that based on sort of the information they relay to me in a phone call. And by sort of maybe looking over some of their training records and some of their stats and things like that. So honestly, with a lot of them, I could be training them or I guess consulting with them remotely for months, like many months before I see them in person. It's definitely nice to see them in person from time to time. You get to check up on things. It's definitely good to sort of build a relationship as well. But to be perfectly honest, I just don't want to be on the road traveling like around week to week. It's so yeah, that's just the way my input is going to work. To be honest, is going to be mostly remote, and then when I do go to maybe, I don't know, 3 or 5 tournaments a year, and maybe see them once or twice outside of that, if we happen to be in the same location for whatever reason, it tends to work quite well.
Nice. So you said that you came over to work with Mike, but obviously that's a huge jump going from Ireland over to California. Were you looking to move, change locations, or was it simply you came across that opportunity and you're like, yeah, I got to take this?
Yeah, it was mainly I just saw the opportunity and it suited sort of what I was doing or what I was interested in at the time. Like, I think I was only maybe 24 or so, maybe 25. So I was shortly finished. It was only a short time after college. I was working as a trainer, like working for myself based in a gym, and just didn't really have any commitments, you know. So it was just I was very mobile in terms of I didn't have any ties, you know, keeping me at home, basically, apart from, you know, family. But other than that, it was easy. So yeah, once I was able to kind of secure work and get a visa taken care of, that's always the biggest stumbling block for anyone from outside the US who wants to work in the US. I was happy to come over.
Were there any like big surprises when you came over here? Had you been over to the States before? Were there any different big cultural shifts when you got over here?
I'd been to the States for 2 summers before that, both on the East Coast. And I did a summer caddying in New Jersey. And I also did an internship with Eric Cressy in Cressy Sport Performance. But that's a little bit different when you know you're only coming they were both 3-month periods. That's a little bit different to kind of moving over and, you know, trying to work and get properly set up here. I wouldn't say there was any huge cultural shifts because I had spent some time here, you know, anyway, and life in Ireland and the US isn't that different, to be honest. Like the cultures and things are reasonably similar. And obviously there's no language barrier. Well, the accent is nearly a language barrier, but no, there's nothing too major, to be perfectly honest.
So I would imagine that most people that are listening have heard of you or heard of Fit for Golf. What would you say is kind of the how would you describe your mentality when it comes to fitness and golf? I think that there's a lot of different ways that people look at what fitness should look like when it comes to golf. And I know that you have some very strong opinions on just the way that you like to train, the way that you run the app, the way that you maximize your golfer's potential.
Yeah, so I think if you're trying to work with people in physical preparation for any sport, you need to be able to determine what are the limiting factors in that sport from a physical perspective. And if we look at golf, what are the demands of golf? Well, there's two main things that are happening in the sport from a physical perspective. Number one is we're making golf swings, and number two is we're walking. There's some standing around as well, but it's mainly walking and swinging. And walking, the ability to walk a golf course and sustain that is very rarely a limiting factor unless there's a serious injury or a major medical problem. And those things are generally not particularly hard to get to a level where there's going to be no further benefits in performance. Like there's tons of regular, everyday club players that are at a level that would be more than sufficient to be PGA Tour standard in terms of walking the golf course because they're fit, active people. But then if we think of the physical qualities that are involved in swinging a golf club at a level that the best players do, then we start to see that there's a huge gulf, and people tend to lack the mobility, the strength and power that higher levels of players do. And like club head speed has the biggest relationship between differences in playing levels when you look at a big population of golfers across a wide range of scores. Some of that is due to like technical mastery for sure, just differences in literally quality of swing. It's a technique rather than a physical thing. But even at the highest levels of golf, we see that that's one of the big differentiating factors. And that's kind of where my big interest is essentially understanding the biomechanics of the swing, what goes into allowing golfers swing faster from a mechanics standpoint, and then how can we enhance the physical qualities that underpin that. And I guess that's it in terms of working with real high level players. But probably what I'm just as interested in is essentially trying to help people get to a very high level of fitness and physical function and then be able to maintain it for as long as possible. And what's sort of really nice for all of us that are interested in both golf and that is that there's huge crossover in that the things that you need to do to be in a position to swing very fast also have great transfer to just staying fit and strong and healthy in everyday life, kind of for decades, really.
Yeah, that's what really resonates with me when going through your stuff and, watching the way that you present information online is that while it is totally geared towards the golfer and really a lot of it is geared towards increasing their strength, increasing their swing speed, you do a great job of crossing it over into the lifelong aspects of it too, because, golf is a unique sport that unlike any others, we can play when we're 5 years old and we want to continue to play until we can't swing a club anymore. Right. And so to really work on the longevity piece, I think is so important. But you mentioned really kind of diving into the mechanics of, what does it take to build swing speed? What are the pieces of the body, the movement pieces? And there is always the technique side. There's the strengthening side. And from my perspective, where it can get kind of muddied is how do we utilize are people using too much or trying to use the exercises too much to work on the technique stuff as opposed to just working on their body and the athleticism?
Yeah, that's something that I kind of think about and talk about a lot. How I usually describe it is that I think there's a gray area where a lot of people get stuck in that they try to improve their swing technique and their physical characteristics like strength and power at the same time. And what often happens, not always, is that they end up choosing exercises that are not specific enough to the golf swing to improve their mechanics. And they're also not stressful enough to cause any type of physiological adaptation that's going to improve the physical quality. I know they're way better than not doing anything, like not exercising at all. But if we're trying to get the most out of like our limited, let's say, training time, I think we always kind of need to ask the question, like, what adaptation is this leading to? Like, is this enhancing the function of my nervous system? Like how well I can recruit muscle fibers and get them to contract. Is it a strong enough stimulus where it's going to increase the size of my muscle fibers? Is there enough mechanical tension? And in a lot of those exercises, there's not. And the argument that could be made sort of to refute that is, well, I'm doing something that is going to enhance my swing technique. But oftentimes I think it's nowhere near as effective as actually practicing your golf swing with a golf club or with drills that are way, way more specific to that. So in general, I think most people are much better off trying to use their physical training time to enhance their physical qualities, use their practice time to work on their skill, and allow those two things merge together, especially when it comes, I would say, to strength exercises. If we try to get too cute with like simulating movement patterns, which is where a lot of people kind of would go down the specificity route, we sort of run into problems very quickly in terms of not being able to load them heavy enough or have many options for progressing them long term, where we can actually make progress in the long run. Like if you think of something like, say, like a cable pulley rotation or a medicine ball throw or something like that. Sure, they could be used to strengthen muscles that are used in the golf swing in a reasonably similar fashion. But in terms of like the coordination and speed, they're still a million miles away from the actual golf swing. So that they're not specific exercises, really. They're slightly more specific than something like a bench press or a deadlift, but I still wouldn't consider them very specific. They're definitely not like technical drills that are going to have a direct impact on your golf swing. And then the other thing is like they just get challenging to load in the long term in a way that you can make a lot of progress, compared to things that are more general in nature, are much more suited to being loaded and building strength and power in the long term. I still incorporate them a little bit because I think they have value, but there just needs to be, in my opinion, a very clear rationale for why you're doing a certain exercise. And there needs to be a good understanding of like, what is the goal of the training? Because otherwise we can just kind of fall into the trap of doing things that no matter how much we improved at the exercise we're doing, it just doesn't have much potential to move the needle in terms of our performance.
I would totally agree that, not asking that simple question of what's the goal here. And I love even further going into what's the adaptation that I'm really trying to work on. And so many of our golfers, I know personally in our community, and I'm sure those in the Fit for Golf community, and I would assume there's a lot of crossover there, we're all stressed for time. We're all looking to make things as efficient as possible. And that's a message that I keep hearing from you is, how do we really make the most sense of what we're doing with the time that we have? We got to practice, we got to train, we got to eat, we got to do all of these different things that are going to move the needle, move us forward. But how do we help people not waste time on, things that don't really matter quite as much? So if you could, what's a bit of a structure that you would tell people like, hey, these are the things that you really should be working on, thinking about as you're getting ready to jump into your golf fitness training program?
Yeah. So generally, if I'm advising somebody with their overall, let's say, physical training, if we take an average, let's say working person that's maybe 50 or 60 years old or whatever, or it doesn't really matter what age, any adult, I would say, or older adult. I'm a big fan of trying to get people to have a slot for exercise pretty much every day. And the reason for that is I think that if people can do that, they're much more likely to build the habit and stick to it. It doesn't mean that every day is going to be a long training session or a very hard training session. But like if you think of it in terms of long-term health and physical function, there's really two elements of training that people have to be on top of. Number one is cardiovascular fitness, what most people refer to as cardio or aerobic training. Like there's kind of no way of arguing with the amount of research that shows how important VO2 max is for longevity, which is basically how aerobically fit you are. And there's also no arguing with the importance of muscle strength. So they're the two things that I get people to focus on mainly. And how I think a really nice way to structure it is simply have 3 training sessions a week for each element. And that might look like something like on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, somebody is going to do their strength training work. It's going to be 3 total body strength training sessions where they do a little bit of lower body, a little bit of trunk, and a little bit of upper body in each session. Before each one of those sessions, they'll go through a dynamic warm-up so that they're getting to work on the mobility and the flexibility stuff that everybody kind of wants to work on and says they need more of. Then on the days in between, they're going to do some cardiovascular exercise. And that might be, depending on what the person enjoys, they might be on a bike, they might be jogging, they might be incline walking on a treadmill, they could be on a rower, an elliptical, they might be playing pickup basketball or hockey, anything that gets your heart rate elevated for a sustained period of time. And it's honestly pretty much that simple for long-term physical function. In an ideal world, I'd also like people to incorporate some sort of what would generally be called like explosiveness or power work or rate of force development work. That's touched on pretty well by intense strength training. What most people don't know is that as we get older, obviously we have a decline in physical function kind of across the board. But from a like force production standpoint, we lose speed and power faster than we lose strength, and we lose strength faster than we lose muscle mass. So we should have like our training set up in a way to help be proactive against that. And so what it tends to look like in a training session on the Monday, Wednesday, Friday is dynamic warm up to get warmed up and work on your mobility, a little bit of lightweight, high speed power work, which might be things like explosive kettlebell swings, things like box jumps, lateral jumps. You can even do like short sprints or very short sprints on a bike. For the upper body, it might be some medicine ball throws or some band work that's very, very fast in nature. Could be something like hitting a punch bag as hard as you can for 10 seconds. And then moving into some strength work, which would be kind of in general, because it's just very efficient, is bigger compound lifts, like squatting, hinging for the lower body, pushing and pulling for the upper body, and trying to get progressively stronger in those movements. And then on that covers really nicely mobility, explosiveness or power, and strength. And those things also cover your muscle mass. And then on the days in between, doing something for your cardiovascular fitness. It makes sense to vary up those things where you have maybe one day that's a longer, slower day where you're trying to get the duration up. You have another day where you're getting the intensity up in more of like an interval type fashion. And then on the other day, you could do a little bit of a mixture or something like that. And that's honestly pretty much what people need to focus on from a physical training standpoint. Obviously, it has to be scaled to their current level. You need to take into account injury concerns they might have to choose the mode of the exercise or exactly which exercises they're doing. And then if somebody is also really interested in getting better at golf, they need to have some time for practice and play. They need to squeeze in some time where they do like specific swing speed training, where they're swinging as fast as they can, ideally with a radar for speed feedback. Pretty quickly, the time requirement there can start to add up. So it just completely depends on how much time someone's able to commit. What's cool is that, like, even with that, say, 3-day of each template, even if you only had 10 minutes each of those days, the improvements that you would make compared to not doing it is absolutely enormous. So yeah, that's kind of the way that I've been sort of structuring training for a long time. I think it works quite nicely for most people and gets them a nice balance across the various different elements. And there's enough variety in there that it keeps people interested.
I love how you break it down so simply. In my personal experience, talking with so many of the different coaches that we've had on the show, it's when somebody like yourself breaks it down into very simple ways of doing it, that's when, we can get really caught up in the flashy exercises and doing all of the different pieces. But really, it boils down to getting simplified and doing the things, right? Doing the strength training, doing the warm-ups, doing all of that. Where do you, because I always find this a little troublesome sometimes with clients and working in some of the corrective exercise stuff. Like if you do have people that you're working on some other more accessory kind of things, some isolation movements, where would you throw that in kind of that template that you just laid out for us?
Honestly, I think that say, like, if we're talking about somebody who's has an injury that they need to rehab, I try and view rehab as much as possible the same as training, because all that you're really doing is scaling an exercise or an activity to whatever the person is currently able to tolerate, and then gradually increasing the intensity to bring them towards whatever goals that they're trying to get to. So, like, for example, if someone has a shoulder issue, their upper body pulling and pushing exercises are probably going to need to be scaled back to something that's, pretty light, maybe a slower tempo with lighter weight and higher reps while they're recovering from that injury, and gradually build up to where they want to get to. And another element that I think is really important there for people who do have some sort of specific issue that they're kind of rehabbing or that is having an impact on their training is, don't let an issue in one specific body part or one specific movement derail the rest of your training. Like, for example, if you have a shoulder or a knee issue, train everything around that as best as you can while you're bringing that area back up to par. And, like, I would even go so far as, like, if someone, like, it's really common for senior golfers to maybe get like a rotator cuff surgery or something like that. Like, you'd often like get an email from them or something saying, I need a, 6-week break or whatever while I get this surgery. And I'd be kind of trying to encourage them, like, 6 weeks of not exercising for someone in that age range, like, is not good in terms of what they're going to lose and how hard it is to build that back up. And that's where things like machines in the gym are so useful, because it allows you to load your muscles without having to pick up any weights. So, like, you could do calf raises, leg presses. You could even do upper body pushing and pulling on the uninjured side. You could be on, things like bikes and rowers that you could use, without using that injured body part. So I try to not, I guess, like, worry too much about getting ultra specific with corrective exercises, and more so just scale the training plan in whatever way a person needs and gradually build it up over time. Like, I think the person who coined the term is Charlie Weingroff, a pretty well-known, like, physio and strength coach. And I think the phrase he uses is that rehab is training, training is rehab. There's no difference between them. You're just scaling them to the level that the person can currently tolerate.
Yeah, it's, anytime you have somebody, even just working on things like posture and getting a little bit more of the upper back and, like you said, the rotator cuff, some of those different pieces, the hips, just putting a little more focus on it. And I guess you talked about even in like the dynamic warm-ups, you're doing some of the things that maybe like the smaller exercises as you would think of. I think it's very easy to get caught up in like, I just want to go get to the gym. I want to do, for some people, I want to go do my bench press or my squats and get into the bigger things. But about how important it is to do that beginning piece and to get your body primed and ready to go for the bigger, stronger exercises.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Like if you have a well-designed training program that's covering what you consider to be, I would say, like important muscles for literally just human movement and human function in general, and you're making sure that all of those are covered across a training week. If you could have someone follow a training program like that for any reasonable period of time, that's going to be very corrective for any issues that they have. Like, because getting stronger, getting more mobile, and getting into better physical condition is going to be like comprehensively corrected. There's not going to be things that aren't getting touched on. Yeah, I think like one of the big things about a dynamic warm-up is like we have to warm up before we train anyway, to reduce the risk of injury and to improve the performance in the training session. So why not do it in a way that also improves our long-term mobility? If you can have some stuff that works on mobility of areas that need to be mobile and commonly get stiff, things like the hips, spine, shoulders, neck, and a little bit of mobility work on those before each workout just adds up really nicely over time as your mobility work. And then you don't need to, devote a lot of training sessions to mobility work. Like I haven't done a mobility session in 15 years. Granted, I'm in my 30s. Some people will say, wait until, your X age or whatever. But on the flip side, I do a dynamic warm up pretty much every day where I'm going through full ranges of motion for my spine, hips, shoulders, neck, because I'm doing that before I'm practicing or playing or before I'm working out. So like there's been improvements in mobility there without actually ever doing specific flexibility sessions. And then the other thing is that if your strength training program is well designed and you have exercises where you're going through a full range of motion, that's also highly effective for improving mobility.
Yeah, I even saw in, I think it was a post that you made either on Twitter or Instagram, and this might have been talking about even before a round of golf, but you said, instead of thinking of it as a warm up, think of it as a mini workout. And I love that, right? Because you see these the tour players, and when you see them in the tour trailer, they're not doing just like a stretching routine. They're actually kind of getting after it a little bit.
Yeah. So what it actually said was, think of a warm up less as stretching out.
Yeah.
And more like a mini workout.
That's right.
Because like the simplest way to look at a warm up is it's preparation for the activity that's about to go ahead. And like anyone who's listening to this podcast is, probably interested in the golf swing and being better at swinging the golf club. It's clearly a very fast, dynamic activity. Like you go through rapid stretches, rapid contractions. It's at high speed. Static stretching is not good preparation for that. It's very, very different to what you're about to do. So we want to get warmed up by moving, starting with slow movements, gradually building up to movements that are much faster and closer in movement pattern to what we're about to do with our golf clubs. And what's nice about that is those types of warm-ups compound over time and can actually make improvements in our physical qualities like mobility and power. Like the higher level players that I work with, granted they have more time and they have a fitness trainer at the golf course, like they all have a warm-up that takes about 20 minutes. Some of them actually like to do, one of them in particular likes to warm up for a little bit longer and almost, like you just said, turn it into a mini workout, but they go through their dynamic warm-up routine which gets the heart rate up a little bit. It also gets them moving their hips and spine and shoulders through a full range of motion. But then they actually really like to finish the workout with things like vertical jumps, med ball throws, med ball slams, maybe even swinging like the stack or their driver, like maximum speed a few times to get really, really warm. So that when they go down to the range, they don't have to go through 15, 20 minutes of trying to warm up and loosen out, hitting wedges and things like that. They'll feel like that when they go to the range, they could take out their driver and be ready to go without, needing to get through that stiffness. And it also has the compounding effect of, if you're doing that a few times a week before rounds, you're going to be getting much, much more exposure to mobility and power work, which benefits long term.
Talking about swing speed, obviously you've got your stack system shirt on, and I know you work with those guys quite a bit, and we just had Marty on the show a couple of weeks ago. You said in kind of the layout of your program, if somebody is interested in the golf swing and they're interested in getting better, that not only practicing their golf is going to be very important, but working on their swing speed is important. And what does that look like for you and the programs that you put together for, let's say, not the tour level guys, but just, more the average golfer that's on the Fit for Golf app? And what can people expect if they've never experienced any kind of speed training before?
Honestly, speed training could not be simpler. And the reason why is that there is physical capabilities, like physical characteristics that are very important, like strength and power and mobility. But there's also a big skill element to it. And skill requires frequent practice to improve. So speed training is literally as simple as practicing swinging as fast as you can with the goal of going faster. So if you can get a radar, I think the PRGR is, I don't have any affiliation with them. I think it's by far the best value radar on the market for speed training. If you could do something like 2 or 3 days a week where you get warmed up, and for people starting out, I think about 15 swings is a good number. As you get more advanced, you'd probably need to, like anything, build up the amount you're doing a little bit more, maybe up to 30, 40 is probably enough for the vast majority of people over the course of a number of months, but I keep it on the low end for as long as you can while still seeing progress. And honestly, it's that simple. Get warmed up, start taking some swings, have the radar for feedback, and having the radar also really boosts motivation. Track your results, and you will naturally start to ramp up the speed. There's things going on in your nervous system in terms of how well you can recruit fast twitch muscle fibers. It's called motor unit recruitment. You're able to send signals to the muscles faster. It's called rate coding. There are 2 things that happen as a result of speed training that are really beneficial. They tend to happen quite quickly. We improve the coordination of how our different muscles work together. And there's just the pure skill element of, we figure out more efficient ways to swing the club based on our bodies, basically. And for people who have never done speed or strength training before, for, let's say, recreational adult golfers, it's really common for golfers to gain 10 miles an hour club head speed in, I would say, 6 to 12 months of training for sure. What's interesting is that, kind of from what I've seen, is that people who are untrained and they start speed training, they can gain 5 miles an hour in a few weeks. The initial gains are really, really quick. And the difference from gaining 5 miles an hour to gaining 10 miles an hour is usually a bit tougher. But it completely depends on what the person has done in the past. For example, if you take the 2 opposite ends of the spectrum, if you take someone who hasn't done much physical training and they have poor swing technique, they have huge, huge room for gains, because If you only got that person to say do workouts and didn't work on their swing speed directly with speed training, they could probably gain 5 or 6 miles an hour with that without really trying to work on their swing speed at all. If you got that same person and they didn't do any workouts and they just did speed training, they'd probably gain similar or, to be honest, a little bit more. But if you combine both of them, like you have someone who works on speed training, which is going to impact their technique, maybe they work with an instructor that also helps with their swing, and they're doing training that's going to improve like their strength and power, like there's huge room there. That person might gain 12 miles an hour, maybe even more, depending on what their low starting point is. But then if you consider like someone on the opposite end of the spectrum, like a tour player, they already have pretty good swing mechanics. They probably already like are aware of the benefits of being faster and have practiced some speed training. And they probably already have done like workouts that are of a reasonable, level of appropriateness. So with someone like that, like if you can gain like honestly 2 or 3 miles an hour in like a season or two would be hugely impressive. Like if you look at the PGA Tour website where they list players' club head speeds, like there's not many players at all gain a significant amount of speed. Like it's impressive. If a player gains, let's say 2 miles an hour from one season to the next, or I would say even more than 3 or 4 miles an hour from when they come out on tour to when they're at their fastest, that would be like really, really impressive. Whereas your average 50 or 60-year-old or 40-year-old club golfer, they might gain that in a week.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like they might actually gain that in like 10 swings because they realize, oh, I can actually swing 107, but I've just been swinging 101 all the time because that's just how I've been swinging. I didn't realize if I actually tried harder, there's way more speed here. So yeah, that's what I would say. Like the people who have basically been doing less are in less good shape and have technically, let's say, poor golf swings, have the most to gain. And like 10, 15 miles an hour is not unheard of. But then at the upper levels, like if a total player gained 3 miles an hour from one season to the next, like that would be unless they're coming off, let's say, some sort of injury or something like that, where they were clearly down from their normal, something like 3 miles an hour is big for those guys.
Yeah. And I think that's pretty refreshing for that maybe more recreational golfer or somebody that hasn't been working on any of it to know, like, sometimes it's a little intimidating to get involved in some of these things and to start these things, but know that you just doing a little bit is going to give you a lot of gain.
100%. Honestly, the training doesn't even need to be hard because when you're a beginner to this stuff, or if you haven't done it in enough time, the initial gains are really, really easy. Like they come, you honestly don't need to work very hard at all to get initial gains. And to be honest, that's actually what I recommend. I recommend not trying to push too hard early on because that leads to people either getting injured or burned out. So yeah, like it's nice that way. And what's interesting with training too, like, and you see this across, like whether it's someone, who, let's say, loves lifting at the gym and they're interested in, getting their barbell lifts up, or it's, a runner who's trying to get their 5 or 10K times down. Like there comes a point in training, it's really interesting, like where the early gains are very large and easy to come by. As you train more and get more advanced, they start to slow down. When that happens, what's interesting is it's extremely easy to maintain the progress you've made. So you'll be hugely improved from where you started, and maintaining that level is pretty easy. Doesn't require much work. Compared to the amount of work that's required to keep improving even a little bit, that can be huge. And oftentimes, like, it gets to a point for people, honestly, where it's like, that's just not work. Like getting that out of it how much I need to do, it's just not worth it because, this is a hobby. I'm doing it for fun. And it's a case of, it actually gets to a point really like where maintaining basically is progress, because as people are getting older, the natural is to decline. So if you've built up a high level from a few years of training, honestly, being able to maintain that then for a long time and not decline is a pretty good deal.
Yeah, that's exactly what Marty Jertson from Ping in the Stack told us. He said after the age of 40, typically you're going to see a decline of like 1 mile per hour per year. And so just maintaining, if you maintain that for 10 years, that means you're going to be 10 miles an hour faster than your cohorts.
Yeah. And what's important to know too for, let's just say, more senior or slightly older golfers is that they often ask, like, am I too old to see improvements? And they might be 50 or 60 or 75 or whatever. And I think we're conditioned because, like, we base almost our assumptions of, say, athletes declining from watching professional sports. And we see, the picture, the soccer player or whoever starting to decline. Maybe it's depending on the sport and the position, maybe it's their late 20s, maybe it's their mid 30s, or maybe sometimes it's their late 30s or early 40s. But what we need to remember there is like that those are people who have been training to reach their genetic potential for a couple of decades. And then they start to see a very small decline. If you're 50 or 60 or 70 and you haven't been training, or you've been training kind of lackluster without a good program and no real direction, when you start training in I would say, like, much more efficient manner, the rate of progress that you can see can be much larger than the rate of the natural biological decline. So that's why even people, when they're 70 or 80 or even older, is that people are often thinking like, oh no, that's an age when you start to, get worse and slow down. Well, yeah, if you're not doing anything, for sure, there's going to be a decline. But if you're training in a pretty good fashion at that age, like, you can 100% get stronger, get faster, and make improvements at any age. Like, one of the coolest areas of research that I see coming out is, like, they do strength training studies in nursing homes with people who are in their 80s and 90s. And, like, you see enormous increases in strength in people in their 80s from like 4, 6, 8 week training programs, like 50% improvements in, say, like, quad strength and stuff like this. Like, that's really important for if you've plans of, say, being able to play golf to a reasonably high level as you get older, or even just have a high level of physical function.
Let's take a second to thank our sponsors over at First Form. And this week I want to highlight their Formula One post-workout protein shake. I use this thing pretty much every day after my workouts because, let's face it, being here in the gym, working all the time with clients, putting on a podcast, it can sometimes be tough to get my protein in on a regular basis. And so I know that with the post-workout shake, the Formula One, first of all, it's fast acting. So right after your workout is a great time to get your protein in to help build your muscles, get yourself stronger, and repair what you've done in the gym. But also, if you don't know if you're going to be able to get your protein in your regular meals, it's just a great way to make sure that you're supplementing and hitting those marks. So be sure to go over to firstform.com/18strong to get your First Form Formula One protein shake. And everyone that enters through that link is going to be put into a drawing every single month for free First Form products. So again, go over to firstform.com/18strong. It's funny. So we just had the Thanksgiving holiday and I was over at my parents' house and they're both 69, getting ready to turn 70. And I was telling them how I want to order them a Hex bar for their house, because I mean, what better exercise for them to just be lifting something a little bit heavy, putting load through their joints, putting load through their bones, because so many of the studies talk about, not just for any kind of sports related function, but just general health, general fitness, longevity. And they were open to it. It was kind of cool. And obviously you can get I just ordered one for my house. I have a 15-year-old son who's, getting into some competitive golf, and I'm like, you need to start lifting some stuff that's a little bit heavier, and he doesn't get to the gym that often. And for all of you listening, you can get a Hex bar at Walmart for $75.
Yeah.
And it's 1,000-pound capacity. It's, it doesn't cost a whole lot. It's a very simple exercise. I know you're a big fan of it. Just helping the population understand that just starting to lift some, and heavy for you could be 65 pounds, right?
Well, yeah, for sure. And even like first of all, I love that. Like that's the exact type of thing I like to hear. But even easier than that I try and like encourage people to do is like I would love to have everybody set up with, bars and plates at home and things like that. It's, it's a hurdle now. Like you can have the easiest way, I would say, to develop like a high level of leg strength at home, if you don't want to have a lot of equipment, is do split stance and single leg exercises where you can put your body mass onto one leg. Like practice like step ups or step downs off a footstool or something like that. Do some split squats holding like any type of weight you have available. Like your muscles don't care what they're being loaded with. They just respond to the tension that's put on them. So you can find ways to load them pretty well without elaborate equipment. And that the response to that compared to not loading them is huge. Yeah, like if there was one like a message that I could send with my social media platforms, and what I try to do more than anything, it's to get, like I'm trying to target golfers, I guess, because that's what like my demographic is, but it's basically just to get the average person to understand like the benefits and value of resistance training / strength training. And golfers have kind of the double whammy of that. It's really beneficial for golf and life. They get two benefits out of it.
Yeah, definitely. Back to the speed thing real quick. Are there any cautions that you would have for people that are just getting started, or really anyone in general, as far as like how frequent they do it? How you mentioned, not going crazy with the amount of swings, but any other cautions for somebody getting involved?
Yeah. And it's not exclusive to speed training. It's the same for pretty much any activity, is that you should ease into it conservatively. No matter what activity you're doing, if you start something and you do too much too soon, that's when there's a high risk of injury. Like that can literally happen with walking. With speed training, obviously it's a reasonably intense activity, but we also need to remember that people who are going to be starting speed training, they generally do have a decent background of swinging. Like they are generally conditioned to swinging because they practice golf and they play golf. But I like the idea of, if you're going to say do 2 or 3 speed training sessions a week, I like the idea of treating your first maybe 4 weeks or so as like an induction into it, and not really worrying about trying to like set and break personal records, and just get your body conditioned to swinging, and then gradually swinging a little bit faster than you're used to. And if you could do that, like the whole gist of exercise, like, is that you put a little bit more stress on your body than it's used to, it adapts to it and then gets stronger. Where that goes wrong is when we put too much stress on our body and it can't adapt to it, and then we keep doing that. That's when an injury usually starts to pick up. So like slow and steady. And then what you'll probably find is that you feel better and better doing it. And naturally, like you can then start to ramp up the speed. I would say that combined with a very thorough warm up, like I'm in reasonably good physical condition. I can't imagine going from like sitting at a desk from a day's work to swinging a golf club as fast as I can. Like that would be a bad idea. So you need to have like a pretty good warm up routine. The same one that you do. Like I literally do the same warm up routine before every single practice session, speed session, workout. It's just automatic. And then before you start swinging as fast as you can, spend a couple of minutes doing practice swings where you start medium and gradually build up to full speed. Like you could do something like a set of 8 medium to like normal, and then a set of 8 that's like pretty fast or close to full speed. And then you should be ready for like going as fast as you can after doing your kind of dynamic warm up. The one like thing with speed training that's interesting, I would say, like, is that the warm up and the speed training session would probably be about equal in length. Like I would say like you could get a really good, like say speed training session done in like 10 to 15 minutes, but the warm up's probably going to have to be that long too. And that's to help not get injured. And you'll also just do way better in the session. Like you'd be amazed at how much faster you are and how much more benefit you can get when you're fully warmed up for a session, as opposed to not really being ready to go.
Would you say that 3 times a week is the limit of what you would have somebody do, speed session wise?
Yeah, like I don't I don't know the perfect answer to this, but I would be very skeptical that there is any benefit to going more frequently than that. And even if there's potential for very, very small gains compared to 3 by week, I would say that it's probably not worth it for the rate you're increasing picking up an injury. Like there won't be a direct relationship between how much we do and how many gains we get. Like the amount of gains we get will start to level off and then actually get to a point where we can't recover from it, and you might actually get less improvement than compared to if you did less. What we need to remember in terms of, say, stress and loading on our soft tissue, like that's a linear relationship in that the more we do, the more it's multiplying. And that's where I'd be worried about picking up like niggles. Like what I've noticed in the last maybe say 4 or 5 years, that from what I can see more common in golfers is injuries in like the elbows and forearms and wrists. So I hear a lot more of golfer's elbow, tennis elbow, and some wrist issues. And I think it's primarily for 2 reasons. One is speed training has gotten way more popular and people dive into it head first without really taking, the kind of gradual build up that I was talking about. And oftentimes it's combined with people now have way more access to practicing indoors, with say cheaper sims and launch monitors and stuff like that. So they have a way bigger volume of practice than they're used to, and their speed training. And the volume is just too high too soon. And yeah, some of the like soft tissue just can't keep up. So yeah, I don't think that there's going to be, I don't think more than 3 days a week is going to be worth it, to be perfectly honest. And even 2 days a week, people make a lot of progress with. I think 1 for beginners would be fine. You'd probably see some progress. But what would happen is like, you'd say do a session. It would take maybe a day or 2 to recover, but then you're going to have like 2 or 3 days of almost like losing it before you get back on it. Whereas if you can do a little bit, take a day off, a little bit, take a day off, or do a little bit, take 2 days off, do a little bit, take 2 days off from speed training. I think that tends to work quite well. But that will be certainly dependent on the person. But yeah, what I definitely don't want someone to do is like, Mike says speed training is a good idea. I'm going to start tomorrow and I'm going to do 50 swings a day. Like that person, I would put money on them probably running into an issue that would derail their progress quite quickly, as opposed to the person who starts with 2 or 3 a week for like 15 swings and they gradually build up over the course of weeks and months.
Yeah, I'm sure you've had this before too, but I've actually had a couple clients or people reach out and say, hey, I've been doing my speed training 6 days a week and I'm not really seeing a whole lot of gain anymore. I'm like, well, how about we go back to 2, and I bet you'll start to see some gains again, or maybe not, but at least you're not going to hurt yourself.
Yeah. So what's interesting about like speed training and fatigue, I learned that, I don't know if you're familiar with Chris Beardsley, the strength and conditioning research guy. So he's an English guy that does a lot of like mentorship and education for coaches. But anyway, he's written a lot about fatigue and the different types of fatigue and how it impacts how training while we're still under fatigue from a previous training session or training sessions kind of inhibit progress. And one of the things that he talks about, which is really interesting, is that when we have central nervous system fatigue, which can be built up from a lot of different types of workouts, and it's primarily related to muscle damage. So muscle damage sounds scary, but that's basically what happens like after an intense workout, whether it's like if you ran for, whatever, like 30 minutes or 60 minutes or whatever someone might do, like you're going to have some muscle damage in your calves and quads and things like that. It's not a big deal. It's one of the signals for your muscles to repair and get stronger. And if you do a hard workout in the gym, you're going to have some muscle damage. When we have muscle damage, that's going to lead to some central nervous system fatigue. And when we have central nervous system fatigue, we can't do as good a job at sending the signal from our brain through our spinal cord to our fast twitch fibers and telling them to recruit. And that's a problem when we're speed training, because they're the exact muscle fibers that we're trying to get better at using. So that's why we, like over time, when we're past the beginner stage and getting to get hard, is that we need to be a little bit smart with our speed training and learning that we need to find windows when we're as fresh as possible to do the training. That's probably not a huge concern for people just starting out, but definitely when people start to hit plateaus, or if it's people who train a lot, like you said, and they're wondering why they're not improving. It's one of the hardest things for motivated, let's say, athletes or people to do, is that when they're not seeing the progress they want, is to scale back the amount they're doing.
Yeah.
It's really hard. And I think golf attracts a lot of, say, like type A personalities because it's hard and you need to put a lot of work into it. And, the feedback is very objective in terms of like your score and your handicap. Those people have done well in other aspects of their life, like school and business and work and things like that, from working harder. It's like, if this isn't going well, I need to work harder. And I get so many emails from people and they lay out, I've been training hard in the gym, I've been doing my speed training, I'm plateauing or I'm getting worse. Like, what exercises do I need to add? Or like, what other workouts do I need to do? And it's like, show me your schedule. It's like, probably need to like cut out some of this stuff and take like more days of rest in between things. And it's hard because they're used to like, but now I feel like I'm not doing enough. Like, how am I going to get better? But generally what it does is gives them a chance to recover between their workouts, because the whole like a mechanism of training is that, like, this is kind of the oldest cliche there is, but like, we don't improve from the training session that we're doing. Generally, we improve from the stimulus that puts on our body. And then when we recover from that is when we see the improvements. But if all we're doing is applying the stimulus and there's not enough time to recover, we can't make that like step-by-step progression. And that can get hard to figure out after a while. But that's one of the things that I would say is important to be mindful of is if you're serious about speed training and you're not seeing the progress you like, is don't be afraid to play around with doing less, basically.
That's such a great point, and one that I hope the people listening take to heart. And that goes for their strength training, that goes for, running, walking, all of it, that, sometimes you can just be putting too much stress and stimulus into the body, and you're never giving it time to go through that repair and recovery period.
Yeah. And that's also like when people start to get aches and pains or get an injury, and like injuries are by far the quickest way to derail progress in general fitness and health or getting better at golf. Because when you're forced to take time out, there's nothing more, infuriating, and there's nothing obviously that ruins consistency like an injury. So there's a certain faction of people where they struggle with the motivation to exercise. Like they struggle with actually showing up and doing it and getting into a routine. But then there is definitely a faction of people where they really struggle to not push themselves too hard. They're in the mindset that more and harder is always better. And that's also a problem. And when those people are basically given like some extra time to recover, and maybe they put more of an emphasis on like their sleep and nutrition rather than just how hard they're doing their training sessions, that's when they really start to make progress. But they struggle because you're literally telling them, no, like if like 2 days in this week or whatever, like your job is to not exercise. Like I want you to do, like you can go for a walk or something like that, but I want you to stay like relaxed and give your body a chance to recover. I don't want you doing another like HIIT session, or I don't want you, doing an extra workout for whatever reason. Like that's just delaying the recovery and you can't get benefit from it.
Totally. Mike, this has been awesome. I got a couple questions that we ask everybody at the end of the show to wrap up here, so we won't take up too much of your time. So just like we ask everybody on the show, Caddyshack or Happy Gilmore?
Happy Gilmore.
I figured strength, speed, it's all about hitting bombs, right?
Yeah, exactly.
If you could pick a walk-up song to the first tee box, what's your song?
DMX, X Gonna Give It To You.
Nice.
I just got my Spotify Wrapped, that everybody was posting yesterday.
Yeah.
And two of my number 1 and 2 songs were both DMX.
I haven't even opened mine up yet, but I'm gonna guess Zach Bryan's probably at the top of mine. But there's some probably 90s hip hop and rap in there for sure.
Yeah.
Is there a book that you like to recommend to people? One that maybe you've read that means a lot to you and that you tend to recommend or have shared with a lot of folks, whether it be golf, fitness, or just something else?
I'll go with 2 for like everyday life stuff. I would say Atomic Habits by James Clear. I think is really good. Probably a popular answer, I'm sure, but it's really good. And then for golf, I think that every like keen golfer that's interested in understanding golf better and improving should read Every Shot Counts by Mark Brody. Arguably nobody has had a bigger influence on the direction that golf has went in the last 10 years or so than Mark Brody.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that, for sure. If you could pick a dream foursome, celebrities, athletes, whoever it might be, that you could go play golf with, who's in your foursome?
So I never got to meet either of my grandfathers. They passed before I was born. So I would pick both of those and probably Rory. I'm a big Rory fan.
Awesome. Can't imagine why.
Yeah, well, Rory is, I think, maybe 2 years older than me. So, like, when I was a teenager playing in Ireland growing up, Rory was kind of getting what he was already famous in Ireland. He was famous in Ireland from when he was quite young. And then obviously his progression was very, very fast and high. So, following him for like a long time, I'd love to play with him.
Excellent. Is there a bucket list course that if we said, Mike, we're flying the 18 Strong jet, we're taking you anywhere you want to go, we have access to go to any golf course on the planet, where are you going?
I think I'd really like to play at Royal County Down in Ireland under the condition that we get a good day of weather. There's so many really good courses in Ireland that I haven't played because I moved here like shortly after college, which is kind of when it's only then when you can start affording to play them, but when you kind of have your own car and stuff. I got to play Cypress Point last year, which was really cool,
Awesome.
which is probably one of the more popular ones. And I went to the Masters last year as well to watch. So I've seen both of those places. I think I've seen some pictures of what can get out and heard reports, and it looks really nice. So that's probably top of my list right now. But I'm not a huge like golf course, sicko. Some people are like, oh my God, have you seen this place? Or they're really interested in like golf course architecture or layouts and stuff like that. I'm not huge for that. Like I appreciate a good one if I'm there, but I don't really have, a list of courses where I'm like, I have to go play here.
Got it. All right. You obviously have a very robust social media presence. Is there a social media account that you like to follow, like to watch, and this doesn't have to be in the golf realm at all, that you would recommend to the 18 Strong crew?
So, yeah, it's funny. I immediately thought of like educational ones, but people who listen to this show, I think need to check out Chasing Scratch. They have a podcast, YouTube channel, social media presence. Their podcast in particular, Chasing Scratch, I would say that people would really, really enjoy. It's excellent. It's basically about two guys in their late 30s with regular jobs, families. They're 11 handicaps, and they kind of come up with an idea one day. Could we get to scratch in a year? And they start to document their progress, and it goes from there. And they're both hilarious, but it also has times where it's serious and there's some soul searching. It's very good. I highly recommend it.
Awesome. We'll definitely check it out. And last piece, what's the best piece of golf advice that you've ever been given?
It's pretty cliche, but so it depends. There's two. I'm going to go with two. So number one is that like you can't get away if you want to get really good at golf, you can't get away from the importance of ball striking. Like you have to hit a lot of greens. If you look at the statistics between greens and regulation and average score or handicap, like that relationship is very clear. You have to get good at hitting the ball. You have to get used to making a lot of boring 2-putt pairs. Obviously that requires like a lot of work and time to put into it. But in terms of like how somebody could maybe improve tomorrow is just trying to be present and actually follow the mantra of one shot at a time. And what that means is that you're not allowing how previous shots in the round have went or what the outcome of the upcoming shot might mean for your score or your handicap, your place in the tournament, affect how you approach the current shot you're in. Like try and treat each golf shot as a separate entity. Something that I try and do when I'm playing, it might sound like kind of weird, but I guess like a mantra or something that I have is I try and be the world's best caddy to myself. So I try and essentially like talk to myself in a way that if I was working for, my best friend or my player and trying to have them do as well as possible over each shot in the round, that's kind of the way that I try and approach it.
That's probably helped save you from trying to make a few of those hero shots out of the trees, cutting a ball around. Yeah.
100%. Like what I would say, an area where I've had to get better on the golf course and I still fall into a trap is getting too aggressive with second shots on par fives when I'm not in a great position off the tee, or there's trouble up around the green because you're thinking these are the holes where you should make birdie, should be up around the green in two, and then all of a sudden it can be really hard to make par. Scott Fawcett has a product system called Decade, which has some really good stuff about that for any kind of very keen golfers.
Yeah, we actually just had Scott on the show just a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, his stuff is really, really fantastic.
Really, yeah, it's awesome. All right, my friend, this was awesome. I could sit and talk to you for another couple of hours, but this has been so great to finally meet you in person, kind of. and get to know you, but pick your brain a little bit. And I know the 18 Strong crew is totally going to go check out all of your stuff if they're not already on your platforms. But can't thank you enough for the time, and just keep up doing the great work, man.
Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the 18 Strong podcast. And if you found this episode helpful, don't forget to share with your friends. And of course, go follow us over on Instagram at 18 Strong. Thanks again. We'll catch up with you next week. Train hard, practice smart, and play better golf.